In the Pindus Mountains, there's a dog that has spent longer defending Greek flocks than Greece has existed as a modern state. It was never bred by design, never shaped by a kennel club committee, and for most of its existence, very few gave it much recognition in literature, apart from Plato himself. That absence isn't a footnote. It's the reason this breed nearly vanished entirely. Not from a single catastrophe, but from decades of a country simply not noticing what it had, as it was so ingrained in the day-to-day of ancient Greek culture. This is the story of the Hellenikos Poimenikos, or now known as the Greek shepherd. The uncomfortable part of that story is that its closest brush with extinction happened not under Ottoman rule, not during war, but during peacetime, at the hands of the very state that claims it as a national symbol. A story that is repeated throughout nations, but not always with a happy ending. There's no founding date for the Greek shepherd, no single breeder or region credited with creating it, and that's not an oversight in the research. It's the condition of the breed's origins. They emerged the way most ancient landrace guardians did. Through centuries of shepherds in the Pindus range and across Epirus, Thessaly, and the Peloponnese, keeping alive whichever dog survived wolves, survived winters, and did the job without being told twice. Some breed historians trace its foundation stock to the old Molossian dogs of antiquity, the same broad lineage credited with producing most of Europe's mountain guardians. Others argue for a more specific cross, pointing to Turkish migrants moving white Balkan Molosses together with Akbash-type dogs into the Greek foothills, which would explain why the two breeds still look like distant cousins. Neither theory can be proven outright, and that uncertainty is worth sitting with rather than smoothing over, because it says something true about how this breed actually developed, through use, not through paperwork. What isn't in dispute is the role. For over 1,000 years, through the Byzantine period and the long stretch of Ottoman administration that followed, transhuman shepherds in the Pindus and beyond depended on these dogs to move flocks between summer and winter pasture and keep them alive along the way. There was no formal breeding program. There was only a brutally effective filter. Dogs that couldn't handle a wolf, couldn't handle a Greek winter, or couldn't be trusted around a flock of sheep didn't get to breed. Everything else about the dog, the size, the coat, the temperament, is a byproduct of that filter, not a design choice. Because the breed was shaped entirely by function, its physical description reads less like an aesthetic ideal and more like a job specification. Males typically stand between 66 and 75 centimeters at the shoulder and weigh 55 to 65 kilograms. Females are notably smaller, usually 60 to 68 centimeters and 45 to 55 kilograms. A sexual dimorphism pronounced enough that experienced shepherds could often tell a dog's role in the pack from a distance. The head is heavy and blunt, built for grappling rather than speed, with a broad skull and deep muzzle that give it enough bite force to hold its ground against a wolf rather than simply outrun one. The coat ranges from short to considerably longer and comes in black, fawn, white, grey, and piebald combinations. There was never a single correct colour, because colour never mattered to the job. What mattered was a double coat dense enough to survive a Pindus winter, and it has that in abundance. Temperament follows the same logic. This is not a dog that herds. It doesn't gather sheep, doesn't direct them, doesn't work at a shepherd's whistle the way a collie does. Its job was always to walk alongside the flock, usually in pairs, and decide independently whether a threat was serious enough to act on. That requires a very specific kind of intelligence, not obedience, but judgment, and it shows in the breed today as wariness towards strangers, a strong territorial instinct, and a loyalty that attaches almost exclusively to the flock and the handler who raised it, rather than to people in general. It's not an aggressive breed by design, but it is an unyielding one, and that distinction matters enormously to anyone assuming it will behave like a companion dog raised on a leash in a city flat. Unsurprisingly, a working dog with such a long history by all accounts behaves brilliantly around children, with protective instincts kicking in if needs be. A loyal breed through and through. Here's where the story stops being quaint. Greece's rural population didn't just gradually modernize after the Second World War. It collapsed as the Civil War, urban migration, and the mechanization of agriculture pulled people off mountain pastures and into cities within a single generation. Transhumant shepherding, the entire economic system the Greek shepherd had been bred to serve, contracted dramatically. Dogs that had spent their whole existence tied to a specific job suddenly had far fewer jobs to do. Some owners brought them into towns where, without the working environment that had shaped them for centuries, they were bred indiscriminately or simply not bred at all. Others, according to shepherds who lived through the period, were abandoned outright once the flocks they guarded were gone. This is the part of the history that tends to get softened into a vague line about changing times. And it shouldn't be. A landrace that had outlasted Byzantine collapse and 4 centuries of Ottoman rule came closer to disappearing during a few decades of Greek state modernization than at any earlier point in its existence. Not through active persecution, but through a total absence of institutional interest. The Greek Kennel Club eventually recognized the breed nationally, but the Fédération Cynologique Internationale never followed through with full international recognition, which meant no coordinated pedigree system, no international breeding oversight, and no real check on the crossbreeding that experienced breeders openly complain about to this day. Estimates now put the number of genetically pure Greek shepherds at under 3,000 animals. A startlingly small figure for a breed that spent a millennium as one of the most common working dogs in its own country. The turn, when it came, didn't come from a kennel club or a government ministry. It came from a wildlife conservation organization. Arcturos, a Greek NGO founded to protect brown bears and wolves in the country's mountain regions, began a dedicated Greek shepherd breeding program in 1998. And the reasoning behind it is the closest thing this story has to a twist. Arcturos didn't step in because the breed was charismatic or commercially valuable. It stepped in because functioning livestock guardian dogs actually reduce conflict between shepherds and the wolves and bears the organization was trying to protect. A shepherd whose flock is well guarded has far less reason to poison or shoot a predator. Saving the Greek shepherd, in other words, became a conservation strategy for the same wolves it had spent 1,000 years fighting off. That's not a tidy ending, and it isn't meant to be one. The Greek shepherd survives today, largely because an environmental group needed it to survive for reasons that have nothing to do with sentiment about an ancient breed. It's still without full FCI recognition. It's still rare outside Greece and increasingly rare inside it. But it's still doing, in isolated pockets of Epirus and the Pindus, exactly what it was doing under Byzantine rule, walking beside a flock, deciding on its own what counts as a threat, and trusting almost no one to make that call for it. I would just like to thank Stefanos Polygenis, who has helped me with the clips in the video. Make sure to check out his channel and Instagram page linked below. See you in the next one.